Well, I was thinking about how the middle class that everybody talks about is kind of come to an end. Uh, and I guess it's probably came to an end quite a while ago. Uh, got a lot of wind today. Hope my thing keeps standing here. Anyway, it got me thinking, when did the middle class start? And I think the real middle class, as most people know it, started right after World War II. Times were good in this country. We were the dominant country. We were an industrial superpower. We were basically untattered, like many other countries were going to have to rebuild, and we didn't. We were strong. Uh, and my father was a World War II vet, and I know he bought a house uh, shortly after he got out. He got married to my mom, and probably about a year and a half, maybe 2 years after he got out of the military, and bought a house and had 3 children. And roughly 10 years after he bought that house, he bought another house right up the street, as a matter of fact, just a little bit bigger house. And a couple of years after he bought that house, I was born, 1962. And so I grew up, I'm going to say, in the second half of the strong middle class, because I think the middle class started going down in 1970, and it was pretty progressive. And I can say that with authority because I remember the 60s and I remember the 70s. I remember the 60s, and most households had one income. I remember the 70s, and it was getting to where the two-income household was becoming necessary. Uh, Things started tightening up. Inflation got bad. By the time I was entering the real workforce, I worked as a kid, wrapped around the neighborhood, mowing and doing all kinds of stuff from the age of 10 years old. I mean, I enjoyed going out and making money whenever I could. I caddied at a country club and teenager, and worked at a gas station as a teenager. And, I did pretty good during the 70s, but I was living at home too, so it's pretty easy to save money when you're got room and board. Uh, but I noticed things tightening up. And I went in the military in 1981, and I could see the economy getting tight, real tight. Uh, and again, going in the military, you kind of got room and board, so money's not a big issue. Uh, you're kind of still getting taken care of. Anyway, the middle class to me was at most a 2.5 to 3 decade thing, and then I think it slowly disappeared. Uh, and now it's, I mean, for the last 20 years, I think it's just about been non-existent. And I think the middle class was stronger in the beginning because people like my dad and that generation grew up pretty lean. So when they did make a good living, they still treated things in a lean way. And my dad made a decent living. He was a machinist and eventually became a mechanical engineer. And we wanted for nothing, but we never had fancy stuff. Uh, our cars were very basic. My mother got a new car probably every 8 to 10 years when the other one was on its last legs, or, but we didn't get, fancy cars. And I think he could have afforded one, but it just wasn't in the cards. It is not the way he did things. We didn't have campers. We didn't have boats. He liked hot rodding, and he bought used old Fiats. And he did some pretty outrageous hop ups on them, but it was a budget hop up. It wasn't like somebody going out and, spending, hell, you see guys spending $100,000 building their garage hot rods now. Anyway, where I'm going with this is, and most of the people in the neighborhood were like that. Nobody, most of your working class, they live, within their means. It wasn't until, I don't know, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, it's hard to say because I never got really into it, that it seemed like people had an appearance they had to keep up. And I always wondered where that came from. Because it wasn't predominant growing up. It didn't seem too predominant in the 80s, but something started changing. And now you see young people, and it's pretty common to see a lifted four-door, four-wheel drive pickup towing a trailer with a real fancy boat that I'm sure costs 40 or 50,000, probably more than that, or a side by side that costs 40 or 50,000. Basically, just luxury items, or a huge camper, another luxury item. I mean, I can't. I still have trouble saying when somebody says I'm going camping and they're pulling a hotel down the road. To me, camping's a tent, a little grill. Go out in the woods or near a river or something and camp. That's the whole idea. You're supposed to be in there in nature, not in a hotel room, which, these new campers, it's just like a small house. They're nicer than some small houses, other than they fall apart and depreciate. But people want from being middle class and being careful and not getting themselves in debt. And I guess then maybe now, or let's go back 20 years, and where people really started all getting credit cards and using the hell out of them, and debt. The consumer-based society is what we no longer have the middle class, but we've got a generation that wants to live like a middle class, but they don't make enough money to live the way they're living. They're just getting farther and farther in debt. It's snowballing debt to live this certain way, and it's starting to show up. 3 million pickups, not counting cars, just pickup trucks, light duty trucks were repoed last year. Um, the trouble with living like that is, and I've told people, when they go to get a new vehicle and it's $800-900 payment, I said, you can afford it. Yeah, you have looked at your finances. You can afford this. But what if you break your leg? Can you afford it then when you're out of work? You got a broken leg, you're laid up, you can't go to work. Can you pay for it then? I mean, anyway, they don't look at the long picture. They things can happen. Things can happen tomorrow. In 10 minutes from now, something can happen. I mean, just living like, there's no consequences to anything you do, and spending all your money and spending all you can borrow can really get you in a bind. Because what happens is, if you do break your leg, by the time you get back in the workforce and everything's been repoed, well, now you can't borrow again. And you still owe the money you owed before you broke your leg. So, I mean, you've ruined your credit. You can't borrow anymore. You lost everything you had. And then we got people, homeless. I'm not saying that's how they all ended up that way. I don't know how many ended up that way. But I will say that I'm sure some of it's due to, just lack of responsibility. I've never really had to live that way. I've never been one that had to keep up with the Joneses. I'm not saying I'm a better person for that or anything else. I'm just saying it didn't appeal to me, and what really doesn't appeal to me is massive debt. To me, it's a bad feeling. It just feels bad in the gut. I've gotten in debt a couple of times, just a little more than I thought I would, and I hated it. I hated the feeling, and I just paid off the stuff, and actually paid off fast as I could, and I'll actually suffer everywhere else just to get the debt out of there, and but it's not a good feeling. Some people, I guess, it doesn't bother. I mean, it's normal, but I got off track on this video because I was talking about the middle class, and like I said, I think the 50s and the 60s, maybe half of the 70s, we had a middle class. And then from that point on, I think we had generations trying to portray a middle class. And along came credit, more credit, and more credit. And now we have a society of people that are on payments for everything. And then add in, how everything's going, where vehicles you want to pick up now, it's $70,000, $80,000. It's no small endeavor. So it's real easy to get in big trouble real fast. Um, it's funny because the middle class generation, like my dad, I won't even call myself the middle class generation. I never considered myself quite there because the economy started failing through the 70s and the 80s. And it became more, rich and poor, or rich and lower middle class, maybe. Uh, but the gap is widened, and anybody, you can look that up. It's widened quite drastically. Um, but I, I, I think the consumerism and the illusion of thinking you have to look a certain way or appear a certain way to be successful, uh, it's bad. Uh, some of the wealthiest people don't appear that way. Uh, in fact, some of the wealthy, they say the most popular car amongst billionaires is a Toyota Camry. Why? Because it's cost effective. It They don't have to mess with it. Uh, it gets good fuel mileage. It holds its value, and that's the way a lot of people think when they have a lot of money. Instead of buying stuff that just depreciates immediately, buy something that holds value, pr- provides has a purpose, uh, and you got people, making, okay, you make 100 grand a year, but 100 grand a year nowadays, that isn't that much, especially if you got kids and a mortgage, and you're driving a, 80, 90, $100,000 pickup truck with a $50,000 boat behind it, and or a, $80,000 camper behind it. All of a sudden, 100,000 a year really isn't crap, and I don't know how we got there, from the middle class, because most of the middle class people were pretty conservative, and probably why there was a middle class. They were conservative. Uh, I think about my friends' dads. Most of them did drive brand new vehicles, and if they did, they were not very frequently bought, uh, and they were, just regular vehicles. I mean, I had a couple. I guess I could think of a couple in high school that the parents had a fancy car, like a brand new Buick Electra or a Lincoln Mark IV or something. But that guy's dad was a doctor. He was an anesthesiologist, so he was making more than most of the dads. He was making a lot more than most of the dads. Uh, so, yeah, okay. Uh, he was still living well within his means buying those cars. He wasn't out of, where you see people now, a tradesman or something, and they make union tradesmen make a good living and that kind of thing, but they still real easy to go above your means with the way things cost nowadays. Uh, Instead of buying that $80,000 pickup, you can buy a used one for 15 grand. That's probably a better truck in reality. Uh, and right there, you're $65,000 less of money you've spent besides the interest. Anyway, I got kind of off track. I wanted to talk about the middle class, and I kind of, because you hear people say, "Oh, there is no more," and there isn't any more middle class. But the middle class wasn't as long lived as people think. I think there was an illusion of a middle class after the middle class. um, the real middle class was 50s, 60s, maybe halfway through the 70s, and then it started to go away. And by the 90s, to that there's no more middle class. It's just people scratching, to stay alive. And even at that, they I think it's part of the consumerism and the illusion to maintain this status quo has made it that way. I think if people were more conservative, it probably wouldn't be as rough. But uh, anyway, the bottom line of the whole video is we had 25 years of middle class. Other than that, we really don't have one. I don't think. My opinion, my thoughts on it. I'm sure there's a lot of people that think differently, but that's my outlook on it. But remain conservative and you know don't live like you have to have the fancy stuff, and you can probably do okay. As long as you're making a decent living. Thanks for watching. Uh, Subscribe; it's free, and like.